All right, excited about this episode of the On Friar podcast, joined by a friend of the pod who just spent the last few days in Dallas, Texas for baseball's winter meetings. Sammy Levitt is with us. Derek, should be a fun one. How are you doing?
I'm good. Sammy's always good people, good insight, knows what he's talking about. And he was just in Dallas for the winter meetings. He was basically hanging out with AJ Preller the entire time, breaking bread, hanging out in AJ's room, watching basketball. So we're just going to turn the whole thing over to him for an hour.
I don't understand. So you've done this before, and I want to say I was looking back in the archives one year, and maybe it was Vegas. You were in AJ's hotel room, and I want to say at one point Sammy posted some interview clips. It appeared to be inside AJ Preller's hotel room. Hotels are large, and there's lots of rooms and lots of open space. Why are these interviews inside the hotel room? That just feels like an intimate place that if I were one of these individuals, I would want to keep reporters away from.
Kevin Towers do the same thing. I think most general managers probably do that. And what they do is they get a room with a side, like a kind of like a suite area.
Adjacent the
So
door.
it's like an adjacent room so they can hoard everybody in there. It almost feels like their home field advantage. Like they know exactly what's going on. No, it's just that team's media. It's not a bunch of the national guys in there trying to get a whole bunch of information from everybody
That's
at one time. It's almost like a more intimate, controlled environment that way.
That's true, because as we know, with these scrum situations, if folks start walking by and say, "Hey, oh, there's AJ Preller, he's talking," all of a sudden you draw a huge crowd, and AJ might not want that. He might want to kind of keep to himself.
Right. It's also like a courtesy of the local media folk too. Like this is your chance. Thanks for covering us all year. We're going to give you guys all this stuff now in kind of a setting where you can ask more questions than you normally would be able to.
I like that. I appreciate it. Okay, I'm on board with the hotel room visits now. Lots to get to with Sammy. It's not like anything concrete happened, but there's plenty of topics to discuss. And Sammy was in the mix, talking with everybody. So excited to hear from him about his time and his impressions after the last few days in Dallas. Thanks to OG's, the sponsor of the On Friar podcast. If you got a game you want to watch, OG's is the place to do it. Go to one of their many locations throughout San Diego County. Tons of TVs. So if it's college football playoff coming up, bowl season, NFL on Sundays, NBA college hoops, OG's the perfect place to do it. A great menu that they're constantly updating. They always have specials and a fantastic beer list. So thanks to OG's for all they do for the On Fire podcast and the NBC7 sports team. Without further ado, the walk-up music. It is the On Friar podcast. He is Derek Togerson. I am Darnay Tripp, live just after 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. Derek, if you weren't on the On Friar podcast and it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, how would you be spending your time?
Am I working or not working?
You're not working.
I'm not working. Oh God, I'm probably doing yard work, doing a project around the house, maybe on the Peloton, something active, I'm sure.
Well, Sammy Levitt would also be doing something active, but we're forcing him to work instead of playing pickleball. And as somebody, look, we all know, like, you have your exercise, your sports schedule, like, you don't want anything to interfere with that. I know how it goes. And so Sammy, generous enough to allow us to preempt his pickleball time to be with us in the On Fire podcast. Thanks, Sammy. How are you?
Yes, this would generally be prime pickleball, Tom. I haven't played in almost a week because I was in Dallas at the winter meeting. So, hey, when you get the kind of opportunity that being on the On Friar podcast is, you don't turn that down. I mean, what a production with the music and the spinning logo. So it's a privilege and an honor to be with you, Darnay, and you, Derek. And it's just the kind of opportunity that you dream of, and you put all other priorities aside.
Yeah, we got ILM doing our stuff here.
I'm going to ignore just the hint of sarcasm that I heard in that, Sammy, and take that as you meant it straight from the heart.
Of course, of
And I
course.
do appreciate it. We made sure the logo spun a couple extra times because we knew
Good.
Sammy Levitt was coming on. I noticed something when I was coming into this is completely unrelated, but I'm going to let you guys decide here. I noticed something as I was walking to our a podcast studio. We have a bunch of like Padres stuff in the background, and we have this one outdated calendar that I've held on to for a couple years. And I walked in, I thought that guy probably shouldn't be hanging in the on Friar studio anymore. One
Oh
Blake
yeah.
Snell. So this is the 2023-2024 Padres and Pups calendar. I'll let you guys decide. We've got Trent Grisham. We've got Manny Machado. We've got Blake Snell. Probably not going to have the Dodger up there. Juan Soto. Probably not going to have the Met
Wait,
up there.
where's the dog in that picture?
The fish
Juan
tank.
Soto doesn't have that dog in him, apparently.
Is it those fish tanks he's next to?
Those are fish tanks that he's next to, yes.
So he's like, they took him to a Petco and put him next to some fish tanks.
Well, Petco is the official sponsor of this year calendar. Ha-seong Kim, sadly, probably not going to have Ha-seong Kim hanging here anymore. Fernando Tatis Jr. looks like kind of an outdated picture of Tati.
Well, this is great for the podcast audience. So, folks, if you have that, they're just listening, please bear with us.
Joe Musgrove, Josh Hader on the calendar. Nick Martinez. We've got a lot of old friends. Luis Campusano, Adrian Morahone, Drew Pomeranz. Sammy, who should I have doing the honors and hanging years after the fact, replacing Blake Snell in the podcast studio?
I say you go with Nando. I mean, that seems like a pretty
feels right.
Yeah, pretty safe bet that Nando is going to be on the team in 2025. So yeah, how about Fernando Tatis Jr.? Can't go wrong with El Nino.
Thank you for settling that. I couldn't get it out of my mind when I walked in the podcast studio. And who better to
the bottom line is those encounters about the dogs. We don't even nobody looked at the players. It's just about the dogs.
All right, Derek.
How about Drew Pomeranz? I personally never saw Drew Pomeranz pitch for the Padres.
Oh, good. Neither did Padres fans. So we're all in the same boat there.
Manny McNuggets think it should be Campy. He's our star catcher now.
He's our only catcher now.
He's our only. Wait, what about Brett Sullivan? We need to get Brett Sullivan.
He's our only catcher
now. Derek, I'll let you lead things off with Sammy. Of all the winter meetings topics, which one do you want to start with?
Yeah, Sammy, why'd you let Garrett Crochet get out of town? No, I'm kidding. I honestly, first off, just how many times, because the Padres didn't do a whole lot that was finalized, and we know a lot of stuff was being done behind the scenes. So take us behind the scenes. How much did AJ tell you that they are working on, or were working on, or came close to, or laying the groundwork for? Like, why should we think that something is imminent, or what is something not imminent? What is actually going on that we don't know about yet?
Yeah, I don't know that something is imminent. Look, this year at the winter meetings, the Padres didn't have any big move, right? In 22, it was the Bogaerts signing. In 23, it was the Soto trade. And we kind of anticipated, I think most of us heading in, that they may not have that big time splash, whether it be a trade or a signing or whatever it might be, heading into these winter meetings. But look, certainly, I think with a lot of what we heard, whether it was the payroll rumblings, whether it was the Cease rumblings and the Padres' appetite for trading one of their free agents to be like a Dylan Cease, whether it was all the rumblings around Roki Sasaki, I think there are things being worked on. AJ essentially said during the meetings, look, you're not always going to show up to the winter meetings and get things done, but find out where you're at with certain teams and certain players, and you move forward from there. I think one thing to remember is the obvious part, which is we're 2 months away from spring training, and number two, with AJ in particular, this is a president of baseball operations that is never shy to make moves deep into an off season, into spring training, into the early part of the year. And so typically the moves sort of come out of nowhere. So we've seen that before. We've seen that in the last calendar year. But look, it certainly seems like they're working towards things, whatever those might be. But how close they are, I'm not sure. I'm sure we'll get more into it. I think when you talk about the starting pitching market, there are probably arguments to be made, to getting those kinds of moves done quicker. And there are probably arguments to be made so wait out the market a little bit until teams that don't find elite starting pitching get a little bit more desperate. So I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more, but they're working on stuff. I'm sure. I know. But yeah, it was but as far as actual transactions, it was very quiet winter meetings for the Padres, aside from their Rule 5 pick, Juan Nunez.
Was there an interaction you had, a storyline that emerged, something that, as you left Dallas, was kind of top of mind for you or particularly interesting to you?
I would say there were 3 main takeaways I had from the winter meetings in general. And I guess I'll start with the broadest of those takeaways, and that is from the moment I showed up at the meetings and started talking with people, the payroll and how the Padres are going to approach that was very top of mind. And I think it became pretty evident from the buzz around there that the Padres and AJ Preller are going to, in all likelihood, have to do a pretty similar job to what they did last year. Now, it's not an identical job, but what I mean by that is potentially shaving off some payroll, potentially staying under the luxury tax. I won't pretend to make guarantees of that. Obviously, the team and AJ hasn't said that. They don't comment on such things, but there's been reporting by Kevin Acee. I think Dennis Lin, has reported similar. Don't quote me on that, but I know Kevin wrote that article early in the winter meetings. And I think talking to people and then, subsequently seeing the rumblings and rumors about Cease and trades and how important Roki Sasaki is to this whole offseason, I think you start to get into a situation where there's smoke, there's fire. And I think it's become pretty clear that AJ is going to have to A, be creative, and B, he's going to have to hit on a lot of moves like he did last year in order for this team to be the best version of what it could be. I believe they're starting in a really good place based on their current roster. There are needs, there are holes, but they do have a lot of talent, really all over, bullpen-wise, rotation-wise, lineup-wise. But this is going to have to be a similar job for AJ, where he's going to have to be really good. And there's not a lot of room for error. So that's takeaway number 1. And by the way, you're going to notice I'm a radio guy, so I give very long answers. Number 2.
We like long answers.
Okay,
because it's detailed answers.
You know what? So do the daily shows on 97.3 The Fan, because I eat up time. Number 2 is I really believe the Padres will be a very serious potential suitor for Roki Sasaki. I had somebody tell me yesterday that they should expect to be finalists for this Roki Sasaki sweepstakes. We heard from Sasaki's agent, Joel Wolf, on day 2 of the meetings. Look, I think everything he said you probably take with a little grain of salt. It was very much made to seem like there's been very, very little communication and discussions about the teams and about what Sasaki values and where he wants to go. I don't know how much I believe that.
It almost sounded like Joe Wolf had never met Roki Sasaki.
Yeah, right. So, okay, but for the purpose of this conversation, let's take him at his word, right? Because some of it does line up with other things that have been said. Look, a couple of things on Sasaki in this takeaway number 2. Number 1, I think for the Padres in particular, he's incredibly important if they can land him because it fills a need. He comes very cheaply. And it probably will clarify what the rest of their offseason should be. Although, if he truly is not going to make that decision for another month, then they may have to move on some things and just hope that Sasaki ultimately picks them. And I do think there are things about the Padres that give them advantages if we're sort of reading the tea leaves. Number one, the fact that Yu Darvish is a member of the Padres, and we know there's admiration there from Sasaki. If you want to take Joe Wolf at his word that there's an argument to be made that a smaller to mid-market team may be a good fit for him because of some of the issues he had with the media in Japan. You know, supposedly he's got a pretty quiet personality. Maybe he would prefer not being in a bigger market, or at least a pressure cooker type market. Maybe a little bit more chill in San Diego would be a good thing. And then I had somebody tell me yesterday that, you know, something that they're really going to value is pitching development. And I think the Padres have a very good case for that. You've got Ruben Niebla. You have a track record of doing some really good things with pitchers that have come here recently, whether it be a King or a Lugo or a Nick Martinez, or list goes on. And I think that should be a selling point for them. So all that with Roki Sasaki, that is a major focus. And then takeaway number 3 is obviously the rumblings around potentially trading Dylan Cease or a Luis Arise. There was obviously reporting on that this morning that, you know, maybe they're taking phone calls on Arise. And again, one of those scenarios where I think where there's a lot of smoke, there's generally fire. And it makes a lot of sense when you pair it with the payroll flexibility or lack thereof. So those are my main 3 takeaways, and they're all sort of intertwined a little bit in an interesting way. But you know, those were kind of my main takeaways from all the meetings. It seems like that trade buzz with Cease is real, and you know, look, it's partially also because the starting pitching market, you know, is I mean, it's really rolling. Free agents coming off the board. You see the haul the White Sox got for Crochet, a little bit different situation, 2 years of control versus 1 year of control. I mean, even the idea that you could flip Cease into some prospects and then use your more prospect depth to go get something else. Like, this is where, and again, it ties back to my first point, where AJ's going to have to be AJ and get really creative if they're going to be in a payroll crunch.
Let's go ahead and give the disclaimer we always have to give is listening on a player for a trade is not the same as actively shopping a player for a trade. So the Padres are not trying to get Luis Ariz out of town or trying to get Dylan Cease out of town. But they would also be dumb if they didn't listen to anybody who was asking about anything, because you never know what kind of deal might come down the pipe. These numbers of these contracts are obscene. I mean, not just Juan Soto. I mean, Max Fried, a guy who's got a recent injury history, getting the biggest left-handed free agent contract of all time. As these things are coming down, are you out there just kind of going, guys, what the hell is going on? What is the market for any? What is Jurickson Profar now going to get? Because Michael Conforto got $17 million for 1 year. Like, are you thinking, AJ, are we being priced out of everything in a baseball economics 2 years after a new CBA where everyone cried poor, gone completely off the rails again?
Yeah, the numbers are very, very big. I mean, obviously the Soto deal was unbelievable. But you even look at, I mean, Gary Sanchez got, what was it, $8.5, $9 million. Danny Jansen got around the same. You know, you look at what Michael Conforto got, even on a 1 year deal, right? Or Nathan Eovaldi getting $25 million
Dodgers
a year.
just flexing for the sake of flexing contract, right?
Yeah,
It's like, screw you, I'll give you $17 million.
Or Montas getting $17 million a year. Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very high-paying market right now, which probably doesn't bode all that well for the Padres. And I'll mention a player that you brought up, Derek, and that's Jurickson Profar. If you want, I'll add a fourth takeaway to the winter meetings as a whole. I did not leave the meetings, or I should say, I left the meetings pretty discouraged at the idea that Jurickson Profar will be a Padre in 2025. And I only say that because if he's going to get what most people are projecting, somewhat around, let's say, a 3 year deal for $10+ million a year, which rightfully so, he's earned, you know, and then you pair it with the other rumblings that are going on around the Padres, it kind of starts to become hard to see that fit. Now, they have a unique relationship. It's been a very mutually beneficial relationship between these two parties. Profar and the Padres, and we know Jurickson loves being a Padre, and he's been the best version of himself with the Padres. So you never say never, but based on all those things, I left the meetings not being super inspired that Jurickson's going to be back. That's just me speculating, my opinion. They could sure use him back because they need a left fielder. So yeah, it's been a wild market though, Derek. Back to your real question, and whether that's because it's the time of the CBA, where we are, if that's I heard somebody mention today moving farther away from COVID. I would also say this: the teams that there have only been really a handful of teams that have spent that kind of big time money so far. So it's not like we're seeing it across the game, but right now there seems to be a discrepancy between a group of teams that are spending that and a group of teams that at this moment are not. So it's an interesting market right now for sure.
I kind of figured like Profar might be one of the guys we hear something on this past week just because of the relationship, just because like they don't have to explore much. Like they know everything they could possibly know about one another. And so as it drags on, does the assumption become, okay, he's definitely not coming to the Padres? You could also look at it as he's going to kick all the tires he can, and maybe he realizes the market isn't what he expects it to be, and they can line up on something with the Padres. So that'll be an interesting one. And then as those pitching numbers, the pitching contracts are coming out, my first thought is Michael King and his agent are seeing all this. And so how are they processing this information in this offseason when we feel like, I think everybody you talk to, I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people you talk to when you say, okay, who should they extend? I think most people would say Michael King just because ace stuff, probably might not be able to, he seems more affordable than Dylan Cease. Luis Arraez, very specific type player, although he fits in well. I worry about that and not knowing, as a player, you could say, look, I just want the insurance. I want to know I'm locked in at a certain number, for the foreseeable future, or the more kind of Boris-y approach where it's like, oh no, you saw what I could do. I'm going to show it to you again and then get a bag. And so I'm really curious how that will impact Michael King, his market, and the Padres' ability to keep him around. Because especially now, I think when Soto signs this deal with the Mets, one of the reactions amongst Padres fans is like, okay, we won the trade. We can feel good about what we got back because there was no chance we were ever going to keep this guy around. Look what we got back in return. That argument becomes a lot stronger if you have Michael King through 2030 or something like that.
Yeah, no, look, I think the world of Michael King. Look, if I had to make like a bold prediction for 2025, I would say that, and I don't know how bold this is based on what he did last year. I think he's going to be like, I think there's a real chance he could be like a serious Cy Young candidate next year. That's how good I think Michael King is. Look,
the numbers back you up there. Yeah, the numbers definitely back you up.
Yeah, if the Padres could somehow find a way to keep him long term, that would be outstanding. I'd sign up for it in a second, and I'd pay him a lot because I think he's going to be really, really good for a long time. But to your wider point, Darnay, yeah, if I'm him and his agent, I'm salivating at the market. When I see Max Fried goes and gets 200+ million, Michael King, if he has anywhere close to the season he had last year, especially after the early kind of up and down nature of it, all the home runs he gave up early, he's going to get a big time deal. And I just looked it up because I couldn't remember. He's going to turn 30 this coming season. So, if you look at that, like, hey, he could get a big time, I don't know, 5-6 year deal. Yeah. I mean, he is somebody who I think at this moment is a big beneficiary of some of the numbers that are going out right now for starting pitching. Now he has to go have a good year, because if he doesn't have a good year, well, then it's going to be, you're going to have one really, really good year and you're going to have another not so good year and only a small sample size of 2 years as a starting pitcher. So I think it's incumbent on him to do what he did again. I think he's going to, quite frankly. I have no reason to believe he's not going to be very, very good. Again, that's how good this stuff is. And I think how much I think of him just individually, like he's so smart. He works hard. He gets it. Like I think a lot of Michael King, and I think you pair that with just excellent stuff. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, he is, if he does it again, assuming he's a free agent, yeah, he's going to be a big time free agent next off season.
Yeah, he screams to me as one of those guys who, if you can get him to do it, you do the, all right, here's a 4-year deal, opt out after year 2 kind of thing, where it's, he's in one of those interesting situations where it's his first full year as a starter since 2018 in the minor leagues, whatever it was. So there's going to be there'll be a lot of teams right now going, okay, well, we don't know if you can replicate this. And I'm sure in some ways in the back recesses of his head, he doesn't know what it's going to look like if he replicates this or not. So do you gamble now and sign a long-term deal with him, or the Padres are like, we'd love to have him on a long-term deal right now, because if he does replicate this, then we've got him on a great pitcher for a lower price. But if you give him a longer-term deal, what if he does blow his arm out? God forbid. It's a real gamble from both sides. And it feels like one of those where the right thing to do should be they come to some kind of an agreement for a long-term deal with some opt-out clauses in there. But I don't know if that's realistic given what you just talked about with the state of starting pitching and how everybody's getting massive amounts of money right now.
Yeah, to your point, I think it's a good point, Derek. There would be incentive for Michael King. There's arguments being made about going and signing a deal, an extension before next offseason. So, look, if they could figure out the numbers and the money, and the Padres could find a way to do it, I would be totally on board. And look, maybe it's one of those deals, and we've seen AJ do this. We talk about creativity that has an opt-out built in. So maybe King could then hit the market in a couple of years, but you extend him at least by a year or two. I'd be totally on board.
Yeah, the Nick Martinez kind of contract where it's got all these different escalators and there's an opt-out after every year. It makes your head spin when you start thinking about it. But if things break well for both sides, everybody's happy.
Yeah.
With the Cease situation, does it make sense to wait past January 15th to make a decision? Like, obviously, like Roki Sasaki, you're not expecting him to show up, be a Cy Young candidate, throw 180 innings. But like a talented arm that's going to contribute in the rotation, do you feel a little bit more comfortable with the idea of parting with Dylan Cease? Look, you're going to have to figure out like a Michael Wacha type situation, like sign somebody maybe closer to the season on like a prove it type deal. Like, and Preller's probably going to have to do that regardless. So Sasaki, we're not expecting him to be just like a replacement for Dylan Cease, but does that ease the blow a little bit and make you more comfortable with the idea of parting with Dylan Cease if knowing how important Roki Sasaki is if he's in place?
Yeah, it's a hard question because getting Sasaki would be great, and it's great on so many different levels, but he's also very young. It's unlikely he's going to throw 200 innings for you next year. And by the way, look, he's a young pitcher, and from things that have been said, he's still a guy who needs some development. And I think that's why that's one of the things they value in a team. So I don't know that there's a guarantee that he's going to show up and be dominant right away. I don't know if there's still going to be some growing pains he goes through. If we're just talking about 2025 in particular, I think what's interesting when you bring up that January 15th date is, you could argue that getting Sasaki then makes it at least easier to trade Cease, then it frees up money, you get some stuff back, and maybe then you can go sign, to your point, a Michael Wacha type or a couple of guys on a couple of one-year deals and hope you can, work a little Ruben Niebla magic and at least, kind of just put together your rotation for a year and make it strong enough where you can be really competitive. Maybe that's what they end up doing. With that said, we're still a month away from January 15th. So, are you going to be able to wait to trade a Dylan Cease for another month while the market is rolling and guys are getting signed and guys are getting traded? I don't know. I don't totally know the answer to that. How, and I think I said this a little bit earlier, how much the Sasaki part of everything, we know it's really important for them for so many reasons, but how much that directly impacts the other very potentially imminent moves they're going to make. That I don't know, and I don't know if they're going to wait to find out what Sasaki is doing before they execute on other things. I think it's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, at that point, we'll also with the Cease thing, you don't know who's looking to add now because they don't want to spend the money on another high price starting pitcher. You don't know who's going to come. I mean, look at a couple of years ago, it was New Year's Eve when Blake Snell and Yu Darvish showed up in San Diego, and 2 weeks later, Joe Musgrove showed up in San Diego. Nobody saw any of that stuff coming. So you just don't know who's going to panic or gamble and when it's all going to come down. It's all we know is nothing's happening with Sasaki until the 15th. And all I know is I think I have said the name Roki Sasaki more than I have said my children's names the last 2 weeks. So it's one of those things where how much focus was played when you're at the winter meetings, you're just walking around the halls. How often did you hear the name Roki Sasaki? And how often was that followed by Padres?
A lot. I mean, I had somebody tell me that they should expect to be finalists. I had somebody else tell me that the Dodgers and Padres are the clear and heavy favorites. Then we had Joe Wolf get up there and make it like, the Sacramento A's may have a great chance at signing him, right? So he didn't say that, but he talked like it.
It was implied. But yeah, just like Juan Soto said, all 30 teams. I'm listening to all 30 teams. Really, totally, guys, for sure. You could totally believe me on that. And I own Fish.
Yeah. So a lot. I mean, look, for really all over the place. People believe the Padres are going to be really serious candidates. I don't know if that means they're going to get them, but I certainly came away feeling like they've got a real shot. And I don't think that's surprising. I mean, we've sort of heard rumblings about their AJ scouting Sasaki and it being a potential destination for a while. To go back to Cease in the market, just because it popped into my head, and I like this. This is like a real podcast where I can just go in whatever direction I want.
Go wherever you want, Sammy.
We do it all the time. We're going to talk about Bill Belichick in a minute. You're fun.
I know the Orioles are or have been linked to the Padres and Cease. I really think there would be a trade partner there. Because, there was a report that came out, I think it was this morning, about the new owners in Baltimore giving the green light to Mike Elias to spend. And he doesn't want to spend because that's just not, how they believe. They don't like the long-term contracts for pitchers. So they may not go get Corbin Burns. They may not want to sign him to a long-term deal. So if you don't want to sign ace-type pitchers to long-term deals, then your option becomes you got to trade for one. And if you only want a year of Dylan Cease, then it would seem to me like the Orioles, who still have a deep system, despite, calling guys up, making some trades the last year or so, it would seem like that would be a really, really good fit. So again, when you relate it back to Sasaki and the timing, like if you could line up with an Orioles and get a package back you want, I don't know how much Sasaki and that ultimate decision would prevent you from doing what you need to do with Cease and his arbitration number and getting talent back. Like, I don't know how much one necessarily has to do with the other. I don't necessarily believe that if you get Sasaki, it means you got to trade Cease or you're going to keep Cease because you got another pitcher on the cheap. That's a hard question, but the Orioles very much stand out to me as a team that would make a lot of sense.
And what do the Orioles have a surplus of? Young outfielders. So is maybe this, a Dylan Cease timeline less contingent on him and more contingent on when or where Jurickson Profar signs? Because if you don't have him coming back and all of a sudden you can get a Heston Kjerstad or a Colton Hauser out of Baltimore for a guy like Dylan Cease as part of a package, that makes that a little more appetizing, doesn't it?
Yeah. And look, once you free up that Cease money, maybe you can go sign Profar for $10 million a year. So yeah, it's it just goes back to the initial conversation of there's a lot of moving pieces when you're trying to quote unquote thread the needle like they are. Like you're literally, it seems like, dealing with with like individual contracts and money you can free up to get to the payroll number you ultimately want to get to.
That's why I liked now that Boston has Garrett Crochet, I don't know how realistic this is, because Tristan Casas wasn't part of that deal, that I recall. And the Mariners were, there were some discussions, Bryce Miller, Brian Wu. Seattle was like, no, we're good. Both those guys have I think a year or two longer than Dylan Cease does, in terms of team control. With Casas, if you bring in a young first baseman, he's only got a couple years, but probably have a better chance of re-signing him than you have Dylan Cease. You bring in a first baseman and then maybe something else, I don't know. That then potentially frees you up to part with Luis Arraez. Not that I want them to trade any of these guys. I'm just looking at the situation and what seems to be the payroll spot they're in and how much they need to trim and their likelihood or not likelihood of re-signing these guys. If you get a first baseman, do you then move Arraez? And through Arraez, can you also address an outfield? Can you get a young arm? Something like that, catcher? I don't know. But somewhat similar to the Juan Soto situation you were in last year, you're taking a step back in terms of overall talent, but depth and just kind of quality of talent across the board has a chance to increase if you do it right, which Preller did it right last year. And as you said earlier, it's incumbent on him to, as Manny McNugget said, bat 1,000 as he did a year ago, which is a tough thing to expect any GM to do.
Yeah, look, and just to go off your point, I want to be clear about something because I see the reaction on social media, and it sort of is the same thing that we talked about last year. Not that we necessarily talked about it face to face, but just in general. Look, I wish that we weren't talking about having to maneuver with the payroll number and it was just, hey, they're gonna sign all these guys like they have in the past. We're just discussing it based on what the rumblings seem to be about how they're going to have to get this done, at least for next year, right? So just like with the Soto situation, look, I don't think that AJ was super pumped about trading Juan Soto after he traded for him the year before, and you've got a guy who's going to be a future Hall of Famer at 25. It's you wish there was, that you weren't necessarily threading the needle like that. And look, you pair it with the place being sold out and fans feeling like, hey, we're we show up and look, I can't comment to all that, but look, it is what it is. I mean, you can only deal with the hand if you're AJ Preller that you have in front of you. And so now it's incumbent to, say, okay, we've got to stay at this number. We've got to try to stay under this threshold. We've got to get creative. We've got a really, really good core. Let's not forget that this core, the core of guys that won 93 games last year, for the most part, are all still here. And this should be a team that's right in the mix right now in 2025. I think that, it doesn't mean they're done, that they're a finished product, but you're trying to make sure this group has what it needs to get into the postseason, give you a shot. I wish it were as easy as, hey, let's just go sign a bunch of guys and improve the team. And Solano, you're on the bench again. Peralta, you're on the bench again. Let's run it back. That doesn't appear to be, in all likelihood, their reality. So it's now, okay, here's the hand you're being dealt, and AJ, you've got to figure it out.
I'm glad you brought up those two guys, because those are two dudes I would want to ask you or anybody else around the team about. Is David Peralta and Donovan Solano. Both of those guys were such huge additions last year, not just for what they did on the field, but I don't know how many times I had a young player, tell me that Donovan Solano, they called him El Professor. He was the professor in there. He was teaching these guys the game and how to be professionals.
Right.
Was there any buzz at all when you were at the winter meetings or talking to AJ of, is there any chance to bring these guys? Is there any desire, any interest in bringing these guys? I know they both want to come back, but it's why are two guys who were so integral to the wonderful chemistry that we saw in 2024 that was leap years ahead of the bad vibe they had in 2023. Why are they not being talked about more?
Yeah, I don't know why they're not being talked about more. You know, look, I wouldn't expect that either of those guys are going to get like a huge deal still. I mean, look, the Padres got very fortunate. They had them on minor league deals and they were so important to the team. I will say this about Solano in particular, and I guess Peralta for that matter, as long as you need an outfielder, like, you know, you're still probably not going to have to pay those guys all that much. And you do need like somebody who could play first base and DH, and Solano can do that. Peralta can play the outfield. Again, I don't anticipate that that's going to be the solution for like everyday guys. I would still think that ideally, if one or both of those guys are back, they're sort of in the same role they were last year. But I don't anticipate that, even though they were very productive, that either of those guys are going to get, you know, multi-year deals or get paid a ton. So who knows? You know, by the time we roll into spring training, you may look up and see a Solano there who's going to play a lot more, you know, based on whatever happens. So I did not, Derek, to your original question, I didn't hear a thing on either of those guys, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, they won't be back. So we'll see.
Peralta, who, I mean, he's not as good as Sammy Levitt, but very good on TikTok.
Yeah, David's got a good TikTok account, so I'm not very good on TikTok. You know, I'm just
okay, all right, yeah.
I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy with a phone. So, but yes, David Peralta. You know what? I've got to watch some more David Peralta TikToks. I know they posted at least some during the season, but I've got to catch up on the freight train TikTok game.
Oh, speaking of, let me just throw this in there because you just lodged it out of my head. Sammy, are you doing the and the 2024 comes to an end thing again this year that you've had so much for the last couple of years? Because that's awesome.
Well, Derek, when you have really only one claim to fame in your life, that's more than we have. Let me put it this way. That thing is it's like an orange, and each year, once you think I've squeezed all the juice I can out of it, there's more to squeeze. I will squeeze every bit of juice out of that fruit every year. But yes, it is posted because I think Darnay is probably
comes to an end. Good night.
Right now, Darnay, do me a favor. Go to my page and tell me how many views that has.
That one. Almost 86 million.
Yeah, so we're doing it again, Derek. We'll see. We're gonna see. Now is prime time. It's December 12th. We've got a few weeks to the end of the year. I usually find out in the next week or two how widespread it might go. So it's prime time. This is my time of year, and I even made time for the On Friar podcast.
I mean, just for context sake, my last TikTok sent out to my 679 followers that I felt did pretty well got less than 5,500 views.
Dude, you suck at TikTok.
Million. Compared to Sammy, I am below replacement level on TikTok. He's
-4 war on TikTok.
Yes. Derek and I think fundamentally disagree on this. And he brought this individual up earlier. I am so glad we can stop talking about Garrett Crochet. I'm so glad we can stop talking about Garrett Crochet because I felt like last year during the deadline, and it has nothing to do with Garrett Crochet, it was Salas and DeVries. And I hate the idea of parting with one or both of those guys. And, you know, John Morosi laid out what I think you referenced a little bit earlier, Sam, like the possibility of trading Cease for prospects, using prospects to get Crochet, and you get 2 years instead of 1 year. Where you don't get 2 years, you get 1 year, and then you have to trade him because you're not going to be able to afford him the following year. And it's the same exact situation that you're in with Dylan Cease, which leads me to a bigger point. That AJ Preller at a certain point, unless he enjoys just kind of the yearly turnover, like every year, big name, gonna have to figure out if we can keep him a year
Right.
later. But like Blake Snell, 3 years, I guess it was. Josh Hader, 1.5 years. Juan Soto, 1.5 years. Potentially 1 year of Dylan Cease. Potentially 1 year of Luis Ariz. We'll see what happens with Michael King. Great talent that has contributed to fantastic seasons. And if that's the method, then that can be the method because they've had some success. They got to an NLCS and we're the second best team in baseball this year. But then it leads us into these difficult conversations and kind of a tough situation every offseason where can we keep this guy? Should we pull the trigger on a deal? They didn't with Snell and Hader. They kind of paid for it. Now they might, apply that lesson now to Dylan Cease. It puts them in a tough situation. And that's one of the reasons I'm glad they shied away from Garrett Crochet. Because I think the focus at some point needs to be on, can we find more Jackson Merrills? Because that guy's going to be around for a long time. And,
that's right. You just walk into CVS and say, what aisle do you keep the Jackson Merrills on? I'll just go take 2 of those. They're not easy to find.
I don't mean necessarily at that level, like rookie all-star. I just mean like a reliable guy that you can have in your lineup that can help you contend. Even if he looks like a Donovan Solano or a David Peralta or this season's Adrian Morejon, what have you, just good, reliable players that you can have some control of for a period of time, as opposed to big star for a year, 1.5 years.
Yeah, it's interesting because at this time last year, when they were trying to shed so much payroll and trading Soto, one of the things that I said a lot was they're getting to a point. And remember, this time last year, that system was really, really deep. It did not feel like it was the Salas, DeVries, and DeVries, I don't think at this time last year was even part of the system yet, but it didn't feel like it was this like top 2 and then like we don't really know what everybody else is, and everybody else is really young, and everybody's young. I mean, everybody's young if you look at that top 30. But
Snelling was coming off winning the minor league pitcher with the finishing second minor league pitcher of the year award, right?
Right. Snelling, Paulie, Marcy, all these guys that it was like, okay, there's like this crop. And by the way, Merrill was a part of this at this time last year, before I think we realized what was going to happen at spring training. I mean, I think that's like the easy part to forget. Is that like before we showed up at spring training, I didn't think, did you think, did anybody think he was going to be on the opening day roster? That was not, I think, what anybody was thinking about Jackson Merrill. So that happened very quickly, but then we got the spring training and it became very clear very quickly that this was like a real thing. And he had a real shot. So anyway, that's a different thing. But at this time last year, while they were shedding all that payroll, you felt like it was like, okay, they've spent all this money. The payroll has to come down, at least for now. Like they need to at some point be able to now supplement the Mannies and the Tatises and the Bogaerts and these guys on big deals, Musgrove and Darvish, with now dipping into this system and allowing these guys to come up and play alongside them and hopefully flourish. And really, that didn't happen aside from the one exception, and that was Merrill. And they ended up, and I thought it was all the right moves at the time, and I still do, but they ended up trading, I mean, so much prospect capital away in the Ariz and Cease and Adam and Scott trades. So now the system's in a little bit of a different place because you don't have that upper level talent that seems like it's almost ready to help you. So yeah, like now it's a different kind of conversation because like they're really, Darnay is like there's like nobody aside from like, let's say a Tirso or Nelas who you would look at and say, okay, we're going to try to play him in left field and he can win the job in spring training. Like last year, there was at least some more like, okay, and again, this is at this time last year, maybe Profar can play out there, but maybe you have a Marcy or a Paulie like ultimately get that job and you can see what you got in one of those guys, and they were already at AA, they were higher in the system. So they're in an interesting spot because they've got Salas and DeVries, but these guys are 18. Like I know AC wrote this morning. I don't want to misquote what he wrote, but it was something alluding to like, I don't know if you read this morning, like that they could be in the brown and gold. What? Hold on. Let me pull it up. This was from, was this AC or was this Jeff? I want to make sure. These are my friends.
So what you're saying is, as you're looking for it, I'll say to clarify.
Yeah, here we go. I pulled it up.
In playing Major League Baseball for the Padres in 2025.
Here's what Kevin wrote this morning. One thing remains clear. They will not be using their top two prospects, shortstop Leo DeVries or catcher Ethan Salas, to improve in the short term. The Padres could have had a shot at left-hander Garrett Crochet, whom the White Sox traded to the Red Sox on Wednesday. Were they willing to part with their prized teenagers, both of whom have a shot to be in brown and gold by the end of this season? Look, I don't put anything past AJ Preller. I mean, look, Merrill, I would have never predicted that at this time last year that he would have been on the opening day roster. DeVries will be 18 this whole season. Salas will turn 19, I think, during the season.
Yeah, June 30th.
I don't know. I certainly wouldn't predict that. It seems too crazy and too young. But yeah, I know I kind of went in a total. I don't remember what the initial question was or what you said, Darnay. But like, yeah, the minor league system. I guess the point is like they're in a really, I think, interesting spot where they have these top two guys who are really young, but people I think are going to be really good. And then everybody else is sort of young, and the top levels of the system, you don't really, there's nobody obvious that's there to immediately help, but you also want to try to hang on to those two top guys. And again, I think it's part of this sort of intricate puzzle that they have to put together right now to make sure that this team, which I think has a real chance to be very, very competitive in 2025, has the best shot they can to make the postseason and hopefully, go in a World Series.
Yeah, Crochet is really, really good. And he's a known commodity, right? He's a guy, although again, we're talking the same thing we said about Michael King. This was his first full year as a starting pitcher. You don't know how his second year with a full workload is going to look. Now, hopefully, again, all these guys stay healthy and they go out and they throw nothing but zeros on the board and they're fantastic starting pitchers and they have great careers. That's what everybody hopes for all of this. When you're talking about depth in the system, I think what we've seen from a lot of these Padres trades is I look around and go, how many of these guys have really become superstars somewhere else? Mackenzie Gore's not been what we thought he was going to be. CJ Abrams looks like he's going to play the part. James Wood looks like he's going to play the part at some points. Most of these other guys are not the world beaters that we were hoping they were going to be. The guys who they've kept at the very top of their prospect rankings, the Fernando Tatis Jr.'s and the Jackson Merrills of the world. Those are the few and far between ones that truly do hit and become decade-long superstars. And I think that's what the Padres have in Ethan Salas and Leodalis DeVries. So it's really hard to part with guys like that. Whereas, they traded their 4th, 5th, and 9th prospects. Okay, those guys, again, it's like the Dylan Leskos of the world who are maybe going to be something. There are a lot of question marks. You just kind of don't know. So I think that's where I would disagree with Darnay's contention that, well, you're going to have the same problem in 2 years. Well, yeah, but you got 2 really good years of a really good pitcher, and we'll kick the can down the road and deal with it again later because $17 million of Eric Hosmer comes off. And there are 2 other guys who come up, and now Salas and DeVries are actually ready in 2 years. Like, you get talent that's a known commodity now that you can fit in your financial structure, and you roll with that and then massage around the fringes. So that's what I think all the Crochet buzz was. And that's why we're so high on Roki Sasaki. You get him for nothing off your big league schedule, goes nothing against your CBT, and you get him for 3 years in the major league, 2 or 3 years of the major league minimum. And you're bridging the talent gap with the Dodgers by signing somebody for basically free for 2 to 3 years. That's why we're all so high on that, to find these guys who are known commodities, who are also going to fit in the financial structure to let you compete with the teams who apparently have printing presses at the bottoms of their stadiums.
Yeah, I think the kicking the can down the road and that, like that, I don't know if that's an analogy or a saying or what that is, but
I'm
think
old, so that's the same from the decade I come from. Yeah, that's the thing.
I understand it. I just know, is that an analogy? Is that a euphemism? I don't know how you define kicking the can down the road, but I think kicking the can down the road is a good way to like describe, I think, what, Darnay was talking about, which is like when you made all the trades you did in 2024, you were kind of kicking the can down the road of this scenario that I was talking about, where it's like, hey, at some point, you're going to have to allow your prospects to come up and see what you got and supplement some of these big contracts. And they essentially elected not to do that in 24 by making these trades. And certainly, had they made a trade for Crochet that included one of those top two guys, it would feel like, okay, this is awesome that we got Crochet, but we're still doing this thing, to your point, Darnay, where it's like kicking the can down the road. Okay, AJ's going to go find the next Salas or DeVries and rebuild the system and the reputation of this system again.
Which he's done really well.
Right. He does it he's amazing at it. And we're just going to keep on, keep the train moving here with just, hey, where is the biggest talent we can acquire? And we're not going to worry about the prospect capital that we have to give up. We're cool with it. It seems like at some point, whether it's this year or next year, like, yeah, they're going to have to start being more careful about those trades and about, again, finding more Jackson Merrills who provide so much value and aren't making a lot of money and don't crush your payroll. Yeah, they've got to start, having more stories like that, it would seem, at some point. And maybe what we're starting to see, the fact that they didn't make the Crochet deal, maybe we're starting to see that turn of the corner a little bit. I don't know. For all we know, in the next 2 months, there are the Salas and DeVries will be parts of other organizations. I don't know. It's AJ, but yeah. I mean, I still contend they're gonna have to do more of what they did with it, like they did with Jackson Merrill at some point.
Yeah, and here's the advice. Maybe it's because I've been around a little bit longer, but I remember these guys who were supposed to be coming up, the Reimer Lirianos and the Chase Headleys of the world, are supposed to be these awesome prospects who didn't turn out to be awesome Major League Baseball players. Ruben Rivera. Going all the way back to some of the older guys. It's the Tony Gwynn's of the world are few and far between. So if the organization sees a Jairo Uriarte and says he's got a really good fastball, but we still think that 2.5 years of Jason Adam is more valuable than 4 years of Jairo Uriarte trying to figure it out at the major league level, then you make that trade. So it's probably that they don't see these guys as being as impactful at the major league level as the guys that they can get in these deals, which is why guys like Salas and DeVries, who look like they're generational types of talents, that's why those are the ones who stick around, and everybody else, you can throw those out and find 3 more of them, because the Padres have one of the best and most widely stocked and heavily populated scouting departments in Major League Baseball. That's why they keep finding all of these guys, and you can get 3 more of them in any given draft.
I meant to, we got to let you go, Samuel. I meant to bring up the Xander Bogaerts scuttlebutt that popped up yesterday. You see that as something or nothing. John Heyman saying they're listening on Xander Bogaerts. Everyone's like, wait a second. There's people that want to take on that contract. I know. That was.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to hear John bring it up. I doubt he would say his name if somebody didn't say that to him, that there's been talk about Bogaerts. It would seem very difficult to move the contract. I guess maybe you could creatively do it. And, if you're going to start paying off some of it, like, yeah, I don't know. I'd be fascinated to see how you'd move Xander and the contract and what you would have to do that. But that was when John said that, I think he said something to like, they're listening on their stars. Like your head starts to spin a little bit. Like, what does that mean? Like,
No.
I don't think so. But yeah, that was interesting. I think I'd put it as still unlikely they're gonna move Xander. You know what they need? They need Xander, to be, in all seriousness, to be Xander. And he's had a really weird couple of years between the injuries and the late position switch. Like I know this is totally, I'm just taking your question and going in a different direction. That's what I've done
I
for
love
the
it.
last hour. But I still have a lot of belief in Xander Bogaerts. I do. I think this is a guy who was really good for a long time. I think he's won. All the things I heard about him before he showed up in San Diego were incredible. And I think he's had a really odd couple of years between the wrist issue, between the shoulder injury on a freak play, the switching positions, being on a team that was really disappointing in his first year, where the whole thing was sort of weird the whole year, and not being able to figure out what on earth was going on. He's had a weird couple of years to begin that contract. So my point is, count me in as a Xander Bogaerts believer that we have by far and away not seen the best of Xander Bogaerts, and he will be the Xander of Boston at some point. I
The
believe
numbers
that.
were
I
pretty
have a lot of
close.
faith.
Jamie, if I say you straight up Xander Bogaerts for Nolan Arenado, what do you say?
I'd have to look at Arenado more, what he did last year. It was actually interesting. I haven't looked at like Arenado and what his numbers are, and I haven't even looked at what his contract is. It is interesting though. Before I showed up
It's
in the
about
meetings,
25 million a year. It's very similar to Bogaerts,
Okay.
and he does have the pod. He has a 6-team approved trade list. The Padres are on it.
Yeah. I mean, you can make the case. But it was funny. I was talking to some of the Cardinals reporters. Like I wasn't aware, I guess, that they were trying to move Arenado like that. Like it was a real big like discussion point, and they're really trying to move him. That team's in an interesting spot, the Cardinals. They're like also trying to shed payroll and play their young guys. And traditionally, that's been a team that is always very competitive and very competent. Like just interesting times in St. Louis. Not that this is on red. This is not on Redbird. It's on Friar. So anyway, I don't know, Derek. Without looking, well, I'd have to look at it more. I'm not sure. I got to look at what he did last year and whatnot.
The answer is yes. You make that trade.
You make it? Okay.
You make
I
that
believe
trade.
you then. I believe you.
Sammy, when are you on 97.3 next?
I will be on. So I do a show Wednesday nights from 7 to 9. So I'll be on next Wednesday from 7 to 9. I'm sure I will fill in from time to time in the new year. And then spring training, I'm scheduled to head out there as usual, first day of spring. So so we'll really get into it in about 2 months and have all that kind of spring training coverage. And but I'll be on the station from time to time. And Wednesday nights from 7 to 9 is a guarantee.
There you go.
So
there's the plug. There's the plug.
People can find me there. But if you really miss my voice, Darnay, we all know where you can find it. So.
I was going to say lots of pickleball and TikTok in the 2 months ahead before you have to go into spring training Sammy mode.
That's right.
So appreciate it as always. Can we get you to say the line?
And with that, this edition of On Friar has come to an end.
Good night.